This episode and every episode of the Beer Guys Radio Show is brought to you by Ironmonger Brewing. Visit Ironmonger at their taproom in Marietta, Georgia, or online at ironmongerbrewing.com.
Open up a tab, grab a seat, and pour a pint. It's time for the Beer Guys Radio Show.
You want free beer? Go to the brewery.
Dedicated to the art, science, and enjoyment of craft beer.
Yo, what's wrong with the beer we got?
Now, here are your hosts, Tim Dennis and Brian Hewitt.
Welcome to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We're broadcasting from the Beer Guys Radio Studios in Marietta, Georgia. And this week, we're going to be talking about beer history, Brian. We're going to be talking to Liz Garibay of the Chicago Brewseum. I'm Tim Dennis, and with me today, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Brian Hewitt.
Hey, Tim. So Liz is the executive director of the Chicago Brewseum. We're going to talk about beer and history, the beer culture summits, and probably a little bit about the Chicago beer scene. Liz, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Liz, do you have a beer right now?
I do.
What are you enjoying right now?
It's what's in my go-to pile. It's a Revolution Fist City.
Okay. Revolution will be on the show, I believe, in 3 weeks, Brian.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
I believe so.
So we're going to be speaking to them. We've got a bunch of Chicago beers. We thought that was appropriate. So we're having a Hubbard's Cave fresh IPA V1 right now. And we've got one of your beers that we'll talk about a little bit later. So we'll get into that. It's going to be a good time. Looking forward to hearing about Chicago beer history.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah. Brian, another busy week for us, as always, running around. In America, Oktoberfest ends early in Munich, in Germany. But Americans aren't having that. We're going to run it for a good solid 6 weeks here.
If the calendar says October,
It's
we're still
Oktoberfest.
Oktoberfesting.
Maybe even into November a little bit,
Yes.
depending on how things fall. But we went down to one of our favorite German places, the Der Biergarten in Atlanta. Had some excellent. We had schnitzel, Jaeger schnitzel, some Schweinhaxe, a bunch of fest beers, Martzens, and that. So that's always a good time going down there and checking that out. And then we had to go get the Crispies, Brian.
That's right. We did.
Went over to Halfway Crooks, new brewery. I think they're a production brewery by law.
Yeah.
Brew pub ish. But went over there, got some lagers and more Oktoberfest beers because that's how we roll.
We were double festing this weekend.
We did do some double
did.
festing.
So,
we sure did.
And the De Beer Garden Oktoberfest was made by Stats next door to them, and that was really good.
That's right.
And,
yes.
And the Halfway Crooks Fest beer was also very nice, and I enjoyed their IPA. I don't think I had an IPA from them before.
I don't think I had either. That was tasty.
That's a great place just to hang out and enjoy the scenery. So it was a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. Liz, does Chicago do the extended Oktoberfest parties?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a national phenomenon. We immediately equate Oktoberfest with that particular month. Although, history says different. But Chicago has a very rich German heritage, so it's definitely ingrained into our culture and identity.
You can't argue with it. We were talking earlier about, I guess the closest we have to an actual drinking holiday in America, maybe 4th of July, something along those lines. That's the closest, but we appropriate very well.
Yeah, we do.
We're really good at that. Yeah, we're going to take St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to take Cinco de Mayo.
Absolutely.
We're going to do Oktoberfest. Those are American holidays now.
I assume we have scholars looking around the globe looking for other drinking holidays that we can appropriate to fill up our calendar.
Keep filling them up. Keep it going.
St. Patrick's Day and Cinco de Mayo aren't even drinking holidays in those countries, or didn't start like it. So
there you go.
I think the fact that we take these different celebrations and make them our own, which basically means let's get drunk, says a lot about who we are as a nation.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Good old America. And Brian, we did something kind of fun and different this week. We did a pork rind tasting.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
We did. So we had a gentleman from Rudolph Foods come in. I didn't even know there were craft small batch pork rinds.
I was aware of them. I'd actually seen them and experimented with them a little bit, and they kind of blew my mind. And they blew them again. It blew it again.
It did, yes.
My mind has been blown twice.
Liz, are those eaten in Chicago? I think that's more of a Southern delicacy.
We definitely have them. Yes, I've seen them quite a bit when I've been in the South, but they are very much a part of the Mexican cuisine. So we have a very strong Latino community. So if you go to any sort of taqueria or any Mexican restaurant, you'll certainly see pork rinds on the menu.
Yeah, absolutely. We had these. Lots of flavors. Brian, did you try the Korean kimchi flavored ones?
I think I did,
It
Tim.
did.
I think this isn't the first time you've asked me
It
that
is
either.
not. These are
No.
my favorite, but we have sea salt and black pepper. There were, I believe, honey chipotle
Yeah.
and blackberry habanero pork rinds.
The
Brian.
blackberry habanero I liked a lot more than I would expect
Yeah.
from reading the packaging. The idea, I'm like, wait, what? And I'm like, it's actually pretty good.
But they even gave us a craft beer pairing guide. And there is, I think it coincides with Super Bowl Sunday. I could be mistaken. But there's a National Pork Rind Day.
Jeez.
Just beautiful.
There's
beautiful.
a national day for everything. Why not pork rinds, Tim?
Why not? Why not? I bet you get to drink with it.
Yes, exactly.
Sure.
It's a new drinking holiday. Tim, I think we should talk about the beers of the week.
Crack open a cold one. It's the Truck and Tap Beer of the Week. Craft beer and food trucks in downtown Woodstock. Truckandtap.com.
Well, Brian, as always, we have a great selection of beers. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to Chicago this week. We did a little pre-gaming with a non-Chicago beer. One of our friends just got back from the GABF in Denver, and he brought us a Cerebral Tangerine Stuffed Milkshake Double IPA. So we pre-gamed with that. We're sipping the Hubbard's Cave IPA right now. We have the collaboration beer between the Chicago Brewseum, the Field Museum, and Temperance Beer Company called All the World is Here, which is a recreation of the 1893. Is that right, Liz?
Yeah, it's inspired by the 1893 World's Fair.
Very cool. So we'll talk about that one a little more in depth later in the show. We also have a 2013 Bourbon County brand barley wine, Brian, from the cellar. And I think we've got some Hubbard's Cave stouts as well, correct?
Yeah, we've got a
little
couple.
pot de creme.
Yes, a mocha pot de creme, and I think it's a stout. Actually, I'm not sure. Accident in Hubbard's Cave.
Man, I'm impressed. I haven't had those.
See, it's good stuff. They started distributing Unani and Hubbard's Cave.
Yes.
Maybe a year ago, 2 years ago here, Brian.
That's about right.
And they've come in pretty strong. We get most
Yeah.
of their stuff here now, so we're looking forward to cracking into those. So
Tim has said that I could not get off Color's Dino S'mores. I looked really hard for it.
Yeah.
We get it occasionally, but we struck out on it.
I'm headed there after the podcast, so if you guys need something to send to something, let me know.
All of the Dino S'mores.
Yes, please.
Yes, absolutely. Well, good stuff. Well, Brian, what is happening this week in the news?
What's in the news? The beer guys have the scoop.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Time for headlines.
All right, so we've got some big news, and it's not the greatest of news for, it's good and bad, depending on how you look at it. Boulder Beer Company, Colorado's oldest craft brewery, is downsizing, ending their distribution, selling off brewing equipment, and laying off 21 of their 50 employees. Definitely bad news for everybody involved there. So they're going to focus solely on their taproom sales. This news comes just months after the brewery celebrated its 40th anniversary. Gina Day, the owner of Boulder Beer Company, says this move will allow the brewery to operate independently for years to come. That's the good news. By downsizing, they're going to continue to be independent. They would have probably had to sell out or close if they had not. So, the good news for people who are sad about this is that you do have until the end of the year to enjoy your packaged shake chocolate porter. After that, you will have to head to the brewery in Colorado.
Brian, I think you grabbed a little shake to bring to the studio today to in memory.
I did, yes. RIP the distributions.
Wasn't a Colorado brewery that did that recently? That did hey, we're in distribution, we're just going to downsize and do pub only?
That sounds familiar.
I bet we see more of that coming up.
Yeah, I think so. So this week we also learned that Carlsberg is working on the world's first paper beer bottle. The finished product is still years from being seen on store shelves, but when it's complete, it will be 100% bio-based and fully recyclable. They're calling it the, quote, green fiber bottle. They've unveiled 2 new prototypes of the bottle. Both are made from sustainably sourced wood fibers and have an inner barrier to allow the bottles to contain beer without messing with the beer. So there's differences in the liners, and they're experimenting with that. On board with the project is also Coca-Cola, Absolut, and L'Oreal. But I have to wonder, will you be able to put these on ice when they're done?
I don't know. Brian, I'm all for our planet. I'm a big fan of our planet.
Sure.
But like the paper drinking straws that they've done, and that's the only paper drinking thing I have to compare to. Those are an abomination. They should be outlawed.
I hate them. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll have to see how these paper beer bottles
If you
go.
drink it quick, they work, but you just drink it quick and throw it away quick.
Maybe that's the key with the beers as well, right?
Shoot 'em.
Just
Yeah.
drink them real quick. Don't let it sit there too long. Just get them down. Well, you're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take a break. We'll be back very soon to talk more about the Chicago Brewseum.
Have you ever thought about owning your own brewery but don't know what it takes to get one built? We're Storytime Construction, and we build breweries. We're Georgia's most experienced and hands-on contractors when it comes to building new breweries and tap rooms, or expanding existing breweries. We offer full build-outs, remodeling, and additions, as well as consulting and construction management. Give us a call at 770-733-4343. Storytime Construction. We build breweries.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Strange things are afoot at the Circle K.
Now, back to the Beer Guys Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Beer Guys Radio Show. If you miss an episode, don't worry. All episodes are available as a podcast. Subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and never miss a show. Now back to our conversation with Liz Garibay and the Chicago Brewseum.
Liz, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the Chicago Brewseum, when I found this, the way we actually found out about this is Becky, who is with our show here. I believe you've exchanged some emails. She was up in Chicago and saw some notification about it. So very interesting, very cool idea. How did the Chicago Brewseum come about?
Well, I'm a historian and a museum professional. I've been working in museums since I was in my teens. And, I studying history in museums and in college and in graduate school, it's very sort of one track, very academic in a way. And working in museums, your job is to take a lot of that academic research and translate it into something for audiences. So just being a lover of the drink myself and spending a lot of time in bars and in breweries, I really just love the fact that if you think about it, beer has always brought people together. It's always been a catalyst for innovation and just an array of things. And it's the reason is because humans have pretty much been drinking since we could walk. So
it sounds accurate. Yeah,
I know.
Sounds like my life.
Yeah.
So taking all of that sort of into consideration, I really just started to regroup and refocus my work to look at history through the lens of alcohol. So it's not so much about here's the history of booze and here's the history of beer. It's more about the social impact, the cultural impact that alcohol has played on human civilization. So that's what I started to do in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then just started to translate it into some work at various museums. And that ended up sort of going from events and programs into exhibitions. And next thing I knew, I realized that there was enough information and enough backing for a whole museum about that whole aspect of beer's role in human life. Definitely worthy of a museum itself. So that's kind of how it was born.
That's something we talk about a lot. When people hear that we've got a beer show, they think it's just a bunch of guys sitting around drinking beer, getting drunk. And, we enjoy the sitting around and drinking beer part, but we like the stories like, talking about the Chicago Brewseum and the history, the culture, the science community, the business, every bit of it. There's just so much. And we have a local author here. Our authors, Ron Smith and Mary O'Boyle, that wrote a book called Atlanta Beer. Talks about the history here. And then they wrote another one about Prohibition in Atlanta. It's just fascinating to see, how ingrained in the communities and how important breweries were to the communities in these cities growing up. It's pretty interesting stuff to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you really dig deep, there's so many layers to beer and alcohol. And I mean, name any aspect of culture and society, right? If you talk about technology, innovation, immigration, crime, economy, politics, I mean, every single thing that you can possibly think of can easily be connected to beer and alcohol, just because, like I said, it's always just been present, and it's definitely been a motivator. One of the things that we talk about often with the Brewseum, and I talk a lot about with my work, is that beer is more than just a beverage. It's a powerful cultural force that has the ability to bring people together and the power to make change. And that's kind of been my mantra through all of this. If you really look at beer, you see just an incredibly powerful industry.
I really enjoyed. I was doing some research for this, and I came across a quote from an article from a number of years ago. And you said this is alcohol is a lubricant for history, and I thought that was a fantastic quote. I don't know if you remember saying that, but I was very amused by that. I wrote it down, so that's pretty clever.
You're full of history, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely one of the things I learned very early on was, I could easily talk about some aspect of beer and beer history, and people would be genuinely interested. But the minute that you actually also give them a beverage and you start having a conversation and you treat it like you would, sitting around a bar or a pub or whatever, all of a sudden those inhibitions come down, right? Because it's not a lecture. It's not someone throwing out all this information at you. It really just becomes a dialogue. And that was sort of what I meant by alcohol as a lubricant for history. It's not only that it makes history happen, but it also provides people that accessibility to it. It's everybody. It's all history is a bunch of stories, right? And so when we start to sort of just again make it a little bit more accessible to everyone, it just becomes more fun, and it's it's a little bit of something for everyone.
Sure, absolutely right. I've had meetings before to where you bring a beer out, and I won't throw this person under the bus and telling them too much, but a business associate of mine that is not involved in my beer business used our studio for a meeting one time, and it was during the workday, and at the end of the meeting, he's like, "Do you guys have beer here?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, we got a fridge full of beer." He's like, "Well, can we have one?" I said, "Sure we can." We sat here for about an hour just enjoying a beer, and it went from a shirt and tie meeting sitting there to the ties loosened a little bit. We're leaned back in the chairs and we're still talking business, but it just relaxed it so much. So
yeah, exactly.
It lets you unwind and really, get around any kind of the structures and the rigor of stuff and get to the heart of matters, which is kind of neat. I'm curious. So it's like all these tie-ins to alcohol, to everything, and it's all stories. What are some of your favorite stories involving history and beer together, and how beer has made a huge impact on what's happening, whether it be Chicago or US or anything really? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost like trying to pick my favorite beer. There's so many good stories. I mean, Chicago, the one of my favorites in Chicago is that so Chicago becomes an official city in 1837, but in 1833 we become an official township. In 1833, there's probably like 200 people living in this small township, and there's already some folks making decisions for the whole place, and they decide that they need to get together and have a meeting and talk about the future of the township. And so, of course, what do? They go have that conversation at like the hottest bar in town called the Sauganash Tavern. So these fellas get together and they're throwing back ales and porters and whiskey and cider and maybe some rum. And they're getting a little tipsy, but having these conversations. And at the end of their night, they vote. They vote if Chicago should become a township instead of a village, and they do it. And so Chicago becomes an official township in the bowels of a bar, and they go back there in 1837, have that same conversation, and we become an official city. So the city's beginnings are literally in the bar, not once but twice.
I love that the way Chicago became a town was a bunch of guys sitting around having some drinks. We're like, let's vote. Let's do this.
So. They got courageous as the night went on. They were probably favoring the village or whatever. Oh, let's be safe. Let's stick to the village. And as it went on, it's like, come on, we can do it. Let's be a township. We can do this.
Absolutely.
That's definitely one of those moments where, I wish I could go back in time and pull up a stool and just, listen in on what's going on.
I do that all the time. Here in Atlanta, we have, I know it's highly contested, but there's a lot of history in Atlanta, of course, with the Civil War and that, with a lot of the sites we have. I just wonder about the conversations that have been had there and the people that walk those paths, kind of what happened in the past.
Sure.
It'd be very interesting. Well, Liz, we've got about a minute left here, and I tell you, this seems like a good time. We have opened up All the World is Here.
Nice.
So can you tell us, it seems to kind of fit the time frame we're talking about right now. Can you tell us about this beer and how this came about?
Yeah, so 1893, Chicago hosts a massive World's Fair. They're really important to the whole development of the city and the future of the city. We just suffered a massive fire. So big moment for us. And the Field Museum, our great partner, was born out of that fair. So when we decided that we would collaborate on a beer, we decided that we needed to be inspired by the stories and some of the ingredients that were represented by the beer industry at the 1893 World's Fair. So that's what you're holding. So all the world is here was actually a motto for the fair. So that's what we went with.
Very cool stuff. And I'm a fan of cream ale, so I love this. I enjoy this one a lot. You're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take another break, but we'll be back very soon to talk more Chicago Brewseum.
Is your brewery or restaurant flooring all jacked up? Your foundation needs to be protected from heat, chemicals, and other contaminants. At the same time, you want to make sure it's slip resistant and you can clean up your messes with soap and water. You know who to call?
ResTech.
We've been manufacturing poured-in-place flooring since 2002, and we've got solutions to fit any facility's needs. Go on and visit our website at
ResTech.net.
That's RES-TEK.net. Drop us a line and we will come to you for a free evaluation.
Oh, yeah.
Craft beer forged with a reverence for tradition and new styles that start a revolution. Ironmonger Brewing. The brewers at Ironmonger Brewing pride themselves at being masters of barrel-aged, hoppy, and sour beers. They invite you to their tap room in Marietta, Georgia to taste and see. Also visit their barrel room for an intimate drinking experience with great live entertainment. Keep up to date on all things Ironmonger by liking them on Facebook. Ironmonger Brewing, establishing a new standard in craft beer.
As a brewery owner or taproom manager, are you looking for ways to enhance your customer experience while maximizing your revenues? Craft Cellar is a mobile solution that helps your brewery drive sales and attract new customers through online pre-sales for beer releases, events, and memberships. Get details now at craftcellar.com. Mention Beer Guys Radio after sign-up and extend your free trial to a full 30 days. Remember, craftcellar.com, craftcellr.com.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Get them all coming.
Now, back to the Beer Guys Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Beer Guys Radio Show. I want to give a quick shout out to one of our great radio affiliates, KENN 1390 AM and 92.1 FM in Farmington, New Mexico. Catch Beer Guys Radio on KENN every Saturday at 10 p.m. local time. Now back to our conversation with Liz Garibay and the Chicago Brewseum.
Liz, as we mentioned just before we went to the break, we are sipping the All the World is Here, your collaboration with Temperance in the Field. And Brian, I think you said you had a quick follow-up question on this beer, right?
Yes. So when I was reading about it, I saw that it was, quote, made with some of the ingredients that were once on display at the fair. And I'm like, what ingredients were on display at the fair that would go into a beer now?
Well, what people sometimes don't know is that the beer industry was really sort of main stage at that fair. There were different buildings where you could walk into and focus on a different, topic of study. And there was one building called the Agricultural Building, where basically breweries just had all of these displays out. So it was almost like walking like a trade show, right? You'd walk up and down the hallway and you'd see, the display from, maybe Pabst Brewing Company or for Valentine Blatz or, any sort of brewery. And part of that too was people exhibiting some of the ingredients that they might use in their beer. So I dug through the different botanical sort of archives of the Field Museum and looked at some of the records and found that two-row Chevalier malt barley was on display at the fair. And so that's used in the beer. I'm trying to think of what else that was in there that we ended up using. I gave the Temperance brewers a long list of different options and said, here, you guys know what will work and what won't. And that's what they ended up doing. But yeah, the two-row Chevalier malt barley was a really nice backbone for the whole beer. It turned out really nice. The response we're getting from it is is pretty outstanding.
Yeah, we're fans. Is there anything that's unique specifically about that Chevalier two-row?
No, I think that I know that it was one of the first times that people were able to actually look at the actual specimen to see what it looked like, which was a little bit of a novel thing, which is really the point of the whole fair, is being able to display these things that, the ordinary person might not have access to. And so that is definitely an ingredient that's out there now. So Temperance is really excited to go source it and use it for the beer.
That's really interesting stuff. I'm curious about it too. I'm wondering if it's been in other beers. I got to ask, why did you go with this style of beer? It's a cream ale. It's an interesting thing, and it's a good choice. Tim likes them, but
I do.
it's
Yes.
not a common choice. So
No, well, during this time period, there were certainly a lot of beers being made with a variety of different ingredients, right? The beginnings of adjunct lager are sort of in this moment of history. And so we kind of just went with a cream ale, a little bit of a nod to that sort of diversity and the use of new ingredients, but also because I think we all just really like cream ales, and we think they don't really have their due time, their due justice. It's also a confusing name, right? Because it's not really an ale as you would think of it is. So we kind of were just having some fun with it. And one other thing that for me I think was a big factor, and certainly for the Field Museum, is that beer has to be sort of a little bit of some, not, if you're really nichey, then that's great for make a specific style of beer. But for the Field Museum, who has, hundreds of thousands of people coming through those doors, got to have something for a lot of those different palates. So
Sure.
we definitely wanted to do something that was a little bit more everyday drinking and different than sort of some of the things that they had been doing in the past.
The triple milkshake fruited IPA may not be the best.
Yeah, they
to
have
put
some.
on
They
it.
have some. The
Yeah.
Field Museum has some really hoppy IPAs as part of their repertoire recently, and so they definitely wanted to kind of steer away from that a little bit. And again, I was excited to be able to focus on this style.
Good
they
stuff.
become more
Awesome.
approachable if you put them in a slushy machine. That's what I.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Liz, the Chicago Brewseum. Now, here's something. When I first started looking up information on it, I thought the Chicago Brewseum was a thing, a place.
Yeah.
Well, the Chicago Brewseum actually encompasses quite a bit, with part of that being the exhibition at the field, but a lot more to it. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, we're certainly a national organization, a nonprofit. And, the goal is to one day have a 30,000 square foot facility with 3 exhibition spaces, event space, a rooftop beer garden, and of course a brewery. But, starting a museum and doing it right is not the easiest thing of getting from point A to point Z. So having that museum background and doing a lot of programming in my repertoire, that's how I knew we needed to start. And so I sort of reached out to a lot of cultural partners that I had worked with for decades, and just said, hey, here's what I'm doing. I've got a great team behind me, and would you guys consider doing things with us? And everybody was incredibly supportive, and what turned to be like a really kind of local story or local endeavor quickly went regional and then quickly went national. And the national support we've gotten has been quite amazing to see. We've done things in Washington, D.C. and in New Orleans. We just opened a month-long exhibition about beer glassware in Seattle. Yeah, and so it's really kind of been a definitely a national endeavor, and that's definitely key to what we're doing, is that we're not just focused on Chicago's beer stories, we're certainly focused on the American beer stories out there.
That's interesting. A glassware exhibition in Seattle, just
Yeah.
different styles of glass throughout the history.
Yeah, so there's a great organization in Seattle called the Pilchuck Glass School. So there's a famous glass blower named Dale Chihuly, and he and a couple other people started this kind of rogue glass making school back in the 60s. And now it's grown to this internationally renowned organization. And I'm pretty good friends with their executive director, and we were chatting about how to collaborate. And so myself and Randy Mosher, who's on our national advisory board, met with them, and we basically just consulted on historic beer glassware through time and selected, I believe it was six different beer glassware that has been around for a long time. and told them stories and just, handed it over to some of their artists. And then their artists blew new glassware that were sort of modern interpretations of the past. And those were all on display and people could go buy them. And it was awesome.
I have not exactly beer glass, but related, but I have a small collection of historical Georgia beer bottles. And I think my oldest one is 1880s, but it's from the Atlanta Brewing Company or
Atlantic Brewing Company.
Atlantic Brewing Company. But, the clear glass bottle with the embossed, and I've got some from the 1940s and that. But I say small collection, it's like 6 bottles, but they're really cool. And the way I've got them spaced out, they kind of tell the story of the history. You can use the bottles to go through the different, time frames of Georgia beer there. So it's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah. It's neat.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you're speaking of this as being, a national, international thing. You have an exhibition at the Field right now, which am I correct, Liz? That runs through January of 2020.
Actually, we'll be making an announcement very soon, but I'm happy to make it here.
Make it here.
We are officially extending that exhibition at the Field Museum.
Okay.
Into July 2020. So
awesome.
Another
Excellent.
6 months.
Now the display at the Field, that does deal mainly with Chicago's brewing history. Is that right?
Yeah. So we had a very small space to work with. So I really wanted to be specific about our discussion within that exhibition space. So we start in 1833, the story that similar to the story I told you before. And then we end in 1893 with the World's Fair, only again, because it made sense that we would end there because that is where the Field Museum was born out of. The Field Museum, basically, after the World's Fair was all said and done, its funder, Marshall Field, said, hey, you know what? We have all this stuff. Let's start a museum. And so that's how the Field Museum was born. So it tells a story of beer during 1800s Chicago and sort of how it grows alongside the growth of the city as a whole. And really the most important part, I think, is how the immigrant story played a key to both of those things.
Now we've got longer to plan our trip to Chicago, Brian.
Exactly. Yeah, stretch it out by another 6 months or so. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, you're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take another break, but we will be back very soon to talk more with Liz Garibay about the Chicago Brewseum. Brian and Tim, the Beer Guys. If you're like us, no lunch or dinner is complete without a pint or two of craft beer.
Which is why Truck and Tap in downtown Woodstock, Alpharetta, and Duluth are always on our list. Tim, why do they call it Truck and Tap?
Well, the tap part is easy, Brian. They've got 18 of them.
As for the truck part, that's where it gets interesting. Truck and Tap features your favorite Atlanta area food trucks, so you're getting a different menu every day.
Truck and Tap in downtown Woodstock, Alpharetta, and Duluth.
Truckandtap.com. Let them know that the Beer Guys sent you.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Now, back to the Beer Guys Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Beer Guys Radio Show. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/beerguys. Patrons get cool perks like Beer Guys swag, commercial-free episodes, and even bonus episodes that aren't available anywhere else.
That's right, Brian.
Yes.
We've got a new one this week.
Oh,
we did a weird beer news episode, Brian.
Oh, that's right. I was there.
Talking crazy. There was alligators involved.
There was.
And all kinds of stuff. So check that out. If you're a Patreon supporter, it's out there waiting on you right now.
Go there now.
Well, Liz, I wanted to ask you something. Brian, you actually brought this to my attention.
Yes.
You found this information on the internet, the lager beer riots of 1855. That's a story, Liz, we've got to hear.
Okay. Well, it goes like this. Mid-1850s, Chicago, the Midwest, and a big part of our country was inhabited by a slew of different kinds of immigrants. The majority of those, specifically in the Midwest, were German. We have a very rich German heritage. If you think about it, right, you think about cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Cleveland, Cincinnati, we all have that very strong shared German heritage. And at this point in time, we already had people who had these very anti-immigrant sentiments. And because the majority of those people were German living here, it was the Germans who were sort of getting attacked. And Germans, of course, as we know, celebrating Oktoberfest and drinking lagers and beer, there's something that they call, that part of their culture is called fest culture, festival culture. basically it's just you're sitting around in a beer garden drinking beer, and festive culture is just, part of their identity. And so all of a sudden, anyone who was living in the United States and had those anti-immigrant sentiments were really kind of attacking not only the Germans, but their culture. And so beer was a part of that. So in Chicago, we had this mayor named Levy Boone, who was anti-immigrant and part of a party called the American Party, also known as the Know Nothing Party. And he basically just wanted to do something to hurt these different immigrant groups. And many of them, as I mentioned, were affiliated with alcohol, with beer. And if you weren't making beer or if you weren't selling beer in a bar, you were certainly drinking it. So that's what he kind of went after. So he did two things. First thing he did was to make it illegal for any bars to be open on Sundays. So this is a time period where you have people working 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. So, what do we all want to do on our day off? Is drink. And all of a sudden, they couldn't do that, right? So that's the first thing he does. And then the second thing he does is he tries to raise liquor license fees from $50 a quarter to $300 a quarter. So really significant. Ouch. Yeah, really significant spike in fees. So like any good tavern owners, many of them decided that they were not going to close down or pay the fees. And so they were arrested and taken to trial. And so that trial happens in April of 1855. And what ends up happening is a lot of these different immigrant groups start to organize themselves for the first time, really. And they basically plan to attack City Hall and attack the mayor. And all these different things happen sort of leading up to that moment. It really is a complicated and a very interesting story. But what happens is folks descend upon City Hall, and a riot ensues, and punches are thrown, shots are fired, at least one guy dies. And that becomes known as the Lager Beer Riot of 1855, lager beer because that is what people are drinking. And it really is sort of something that is rooted in people's freedom to drink. So this is sort of a major moment in our city's history because it's the first moment of civil unrest for the city of Chicago. And the other thing for me, I think more importantly, not just as a historian, but as a Chicagoan, is that the next year, Levy Boone is up for re-election, and all those immigrant groups stay organized. And so they actually go to the polls. People weren't voting at the time. Men weren't voting at the time. And so they stay organized, they go vote, and Levy Boone is not re-elected. So for me, the 1855 Lager Beer Riot is not only Chicago's first moment of civil unrest, but it really is the beginnings of Chicago's identity as a political machine. So it's really important, and it's all related to beer, and it's definitely a story that we tell in our exhibition. And it's such a complicated story, we decided to make a video out of it, and we actually got local actor Michael Shannon to do the narration for us.
Very cool.
Really? Cool.
Yeah. That's talking about that with the German history and that, since you mentioned it, reminded me, I watched the Ken Burns Prohibition documentary.
Oh, yeah.
And he talks a lot in there about, they used every angle they could, either to get the temperance folks on their side or to get people on the side, depending on their political leanings with that. And so they went to the German communities and said, they're attacking your culture here. This is attacking our culture, and you had people like little fella Augustus Busch.
Yeah.
And those guys that
little
said, hey, they're attacking our cultures here. And it obviously worked out okay for the Busch and Anheuser families.
Yeah, a lot of those brewers and brewery owners ended up getting very, very much involved in politics after that whole incident. So definitely sort of was a catalyst for the beer industry and anyone involved with it to sort of bring their hands together and say, hey, we're gonna fight back. And so definitely a major moment, not just in Chicago history, but American history.
It's definitely a matter of survival. But that brings us to, and this is a topic you're going to cover in the upcoming Beer Culture Summit, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a session that will allude to it for sure.
And that's happening October 24th through the 27th. And
yeah.
It's a multiple day thing with a lot of guest speakers. Is that right?
Yeah, we're bringing in dozens of folks from all over the country, the summit. So the Beer Culture Summit is kind of like a mashup of an academic conference, a museum conference, a beer industry conference, and something for the public. Having been to all of those kinds of conferences, they're all very unique and very different, but they're also very isolated, right? We share information with a lot of the same people. And I noticed that there's a lot of overlap in topics that we all discuss. And so, for me, it's like, how can we all sort of bring all of these things to light, but use beer as the common denominator? And so that's kind of what the summit is. And I was really excited because one of the first people I had a conversation about doing this with was Teresa McCullough, the beer historian at the Smithsonian. And when I was telling her about my idea, she's like, "This is a great idea. Let's do it. Let me help you do it." I'm excited that the Beer Culture Summit is being presented in collaboration with the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, and literally is a 4-day affair where opening night is at Goose Island Barrel House, and John Hall, who's on our board of directors, will have a chat with everyone, and Goose is going to bust out some special rare beers, maybe things that are aged in barrels. Then the next day, we're going to do sessions at the Field Museum with an array of different folks, Ray Daniels from Cicerone, Randy Mosher, Travis Rupp, Ryan Williams from the Field Museum. Teresa, of course, will be a part of that. That night, we're having a big party at Metropolitan Brewing where we're releasing another historic narrative beer based on the research of Dr. Jennifer Jordan in Milwaukee. And then the next day, we're doing more sessions about diversity and inclusion at the Chicago History Museum. There's internet sensation Afro Beer Chick will be a part of that. The Beer Babe is moderating. And then that night, we're having another party and conversation about couples and beer. It's called For the Love of Beer, and Kate Burnott from the Takeout is moderating that for us. And then on Sunday, we wrap it up with things happening all over the city, all different bars, different breweries. It's kind of like, it's just going to be a really good time that sort of is a great mix of beer history, culture, education, and partying.
That sounds like a lot of work to put on, Liz.
Yeah, I've been a little consumed this year with the whole thing. I have a hard time, organizing my own calendar. So then you have 35 people involved.
Right. Yeah.
And getting them to Chicago too, right? So
sure.
Exactly.
We'd mentioned earlier, we had Travis Rupp on the show talking beer archaeology a month or two ago, I guess. Wasn't that long ago.
Wasn't that long ago. You have to go listen to him talk. Seriously.
Yeah, check it out. Oh, yeah. It's good stuff. Now, Liz, we've got to ask this before we get done here. This isn't beer, but a Chicago famous alcoholic beverage, Malort.
Yeah, Malort.
Are you pro or anti Malort?
I like Malort.
Okay. All right.
I don't like shots of anything. I'm a big fan of sipping my spirits, and I actually don't mind sipping Malort. You guys need to come to Chicago and go to a bar called Patty Long's, where the guy who actually runs Malort works and sort of is responsible for reviving Malort. You also have to go to Metropolitan Brewing, where Malort is the only thing besides beer that is available to you. It really is part of who we are. I think most people will agree that you can't agree whether you like it or not.
That's fair. I know what you mean. Sure.
Yeah, but certainly a very Chicago thing for sure. Our drink is everyone. You go to a different city and you have different kinds of drinks, like a Manhattan or a Sazerac or whatever. In Chicago, it literally is a beer and a shot, and it has to be an old style and a shot of Malort.
I have seen that,
yes,
actually. I've seen
the Boilermaker, yeah.
The Chicago Handshake is what it's called.
Good stuff. Well, Liz, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. If folks want to hear more about what's going on with the Chicago Brewseum, how would they do that?
Yeah, you can visit our website, which is chicagobrewseum.org, or follow us on Instagram and Twitter. We are at Shy Brewseum. And then we're also on Facebook, and we post all of the stuff we're doing on all of those platforms.
Excellent. Sounds good. Thank you much, Liz.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of the Beer Guys Radio Show. Coming up next week, we're heading to South America, Brian.
We are? Wow.
Virtually. We're virtually heading to South America. We're going to talk with Peru's Chilliwassee Beer Company. For more craft beer info, follow us online. We are Beer Guys Radio on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great week, and don't forget to drink Malort. Cheers.